Hello students. In this video, let us continue our lesson Globe and Maps. We will be starting with the types of maps. On the basis of scale and purpose, maps can be classified as follows. So first, we'll be looking into the different types of classification of maps. We learned in our previous lesson why maps are so useful and about the different terminologies associated with maps, that is, cartography and atlases. Now, let us understand the different types of maps. On the basis of scale and purpose, maps can be classified as follows. So, the first classification that we have are maps that are based on scale. There are two types of maps that are based on scale. So, the first one is large scale maps. These maps represent small areas. So, it's actually the opposite of the term that has been given. Large scale maps are those maps that are used to represent smaller areas. The reason why they are called as large scale is because the scale that is associated for each unit in the map corresponds to a small area in the actual land that the map is representing. You will understand this more once we learn more about large scale maps. So, these maps represent small areas and they can be further divided into cadastral maps and topographical maps. The cadastral maps are the ones that show individual property. Okay, so the large scale maps, we can divide them into two more categories. Those are the cadastral maps and the topographical maps. So the cadastral maps are the ones that show individual property, whereas the topographical maps that we can see over here show detailed surface features. Now let's look into them in more detail. Here we have a diagrammatic representation. This is a large scale map. So you need to learn how you can read the scale that is present in a map. Over here you have a ratio. That is 1 is to 25,000. What do you think that? Over here, what this is referring to is 1 unit on our map represents 25,000 such units in the real world. So this unit is usually in centimeters, and what this map is saying over here is 1 centimeter on the map corresponds to 25,000 centimeters in the real world. Now coming to a similar scale in a small scale map, here you have 1 is to 205 million. Okay, so what this is saying is 1 centimeter in this map corresponds to 205 million centimeters in the real world. So one of the reasons why this is called a small scale map is because every unit of land is represented by a very small area in the map itself. Whereas in large scale maps, the representation is larger in comparison. That is why the terminologies used can be a little confusing for you to understand, but take your time and understand it clearly. The first thing you need to do is to learn how to understand the scale. Coming down to small scale maps, they represent large areas such as the world, continents, or countries. There are two types. So we observed in large scale maps that there are two types. One is cadastral maps and the other was topographical maps. Similarly, even in small scale graphs, we have two types, that is wall maps and atlas maps. Wall maps are larger in size than the atlas. So you might have seen wall maps. We generally refer to them as charts. Okay, they might have these in your school library. So wall maps, they're used as teaching aids to teach about maps in a classroom. They can show general and important features such as political divisions, physical features, etc. These can be perhaps the size of your blackboard, and they need to be big enough so that all of you sitting in a classroom can see it. The next kind is the atlas maps. And the maps in the atlas, they are smaller in size, but they also give us some information. So these are the kinds of map that you usually use in your atlas, or you can buy from shops and use it for your annotation purposes for your learning, and then stick it inside your notebooks. So these are the second type of small scale maps. Over here, as we already saw, is a diagram of a small scale map with the scale present over here. So you need to be very thorough with the different categories of maps. Broadly, you can classify maps based on scale into two types. The first type is the large scale map, and the second type is the small scale map. Now let's try to add this to our notes. I'm just going to add it over here. So what did we learn? Based on the scale, we can classify. Okay, based on the scale, we can classify maps into large scale and small scale. Now, furthermore, each of these have two subcategories. Do you remember the two subcategories of the large scale maps? They are, as you can see right above here, they are the cadastral ones and the topographical maps. Okay. Up next, we have the different types of small scale maps also. So there are two subcategories of the small scale maps, and they are the wall maps and the atlas maps. Now remember, the small scale maps always represent a very large area, whereas large scale maps represent a much smaller area. Now you can remember this in one way. This ratio you can consider to be a fraction. So this can be considered to be as the fraction 1 divided by 25,000. Similarly, this is the fraction 1 divided by 205 million. So in mathematics, you should know that the value of this is much less than the value of 1 by 25,000, because as the denominator increases, the value of the fraction decreases. So this is one way to remember why the large scale and small scale maps are called so. If you didn't understand this, you can just ignore and try to understand why the small scale and large scale maps are called so, and remember it so that you don't get confused. Up next, we have another type of classification. This is the type of classification that is based on purpose. They are also known as thematic maps. So when you classify maps based on the purpose they are serving, they are called as thematic maps. Now, what are the different types of purpose a map can serve is classified here. The first one, you have physical maps. These maps represent the physical features such as mountains, plateaus, plains, rivers, etc. So these are the features that are represented in a physical map. And the political map shows boundaries between states, countries, continents, their location, area, etc. Now, if you're interested in understanding the topography, the geographical features, and the physical features, then you need to go and find a physical map. because this gives you clear information about the physical features. For example, what is the altitude of an area? Are there any rivers flowing in that area? What is the nature of the land? Is it plain? Is it elevated like a plateau? Etc. So, these are the kinds of information you can expect from a physical map. Whereas the topographical map represents other political features that has got to do with boundaries or borders of countries, boundaries between state, that is state lines, maybe different roads, etc. So all these you can get from the political map. There's another kind of map, that is distribution map. So, one special feature about a distribution map is that distribution maps can only be created after collecting information about a particular area of land over a period of time, because it deals with distribution of definite features such as land use, temperature, rainfall, population, soils, natural vegetation, crops, minerals, industries, railways, roads, waterways, etc. So there is an amplitude of information that we can obtain from distribution map. This is nothing but a representation of the information that is collected. When we are learning about anything that has got to do with geography, superimposing it on a map, like in a distribution map, is a very easy and understandable way to learn about a particular area of land. So these are the three maps based on the purpose. Example, here is a railway map of Karnataka, and you have the railway lines that are shown here in black and white. You also have a legend here, so this is another important aspect of a map where the legend shows you what the symbols that are inside the map mean. So the legend is saying that the dotted or the cut lines over here, it represent the state boundaries, as you can see the outline of Karnataka over here, and the district boundaries are represented by a different kind of lines. This is essential because you need to differentiate between the state and district boundaries in this particular map. In addition, you have the state capital Bengaluru that is represented with a dot and a circle around it. Whereas the smaller district headquarters are represented using a smaller such symbol. So here is an example for a distribution map. Next, let's move on to the components of a map. The basic components of a good map. Whenever you're talking about maps, good map means a map that can be easily read, understood, and it is not ambiguous in any way. So the components of a good map include the title, scale, latitudes, longitudes, direction, and index. So these are the components of a good map. So the title, every map must have a suitable title which tells us the contents of a map. For example, India, physical features, or India, political, etc. So these are the two different possible titles of a map. In addition, we just learnt about scale. The scale is a ratio between the distance on the map and the corresponding distance on the ground. So the scale between the distance on the map and the corresponding distance on the ground is called as the scale. So this scale is very important because it gives you an idea about how big the land is in the real world. It helps us to know the distance between two places on the ground. The distance between 2 points on the map are closer than the actual distance on the ground. Now, you see over here, because the map is much smaller Usually it's much smaller than the area that it's representing. The distance between 2 points on the map is closer than the actual distance. The scale gives us an idea about how 2 points are separated, or by what distance the 2 points are separated in the real world, using the ratio between the size of the map and the size of the actual place it's representing. Next, we have already learnt about latitudes and longitudes in our study of the globe. So these are a grid of imaginary lines, and it helps us find the location, distance and direction of the places on the map. So by knowing the intersection of a particular latitude and longitude, we can pinpoint to any one particular place on the map. Now the direction. So in a map, the direction is shown by a symbol of arrows with the letter N on top. The head of the arrow points to the north. So this helps you to understand how you should be reading the map. N is always given by an upward facing arrow, that is, it points towards the north. Once you know the north, you can easily find the other directions. So you should know how you can find the other directions once you know one of the directions. Here is how you can point the other directions once you know north. When you're looking at a piece of paper with north that is facing towards the top of the paper, then your left hand side becomes west, your right hand side is east, and the opposite of north is south. In addition, you can also find the four secondary directions, that is northwest between north and west. Similarly, the other three, southwest, southeast and northeast. So this is how you should make sure you have the other directions once you have the north in your map. Up next, you have the index or the key. A symbol used to represent any feature is called as the index. So we learnt about legends, and any symbol in a legend is called as an index. The index is an important component and represents all the features shown on a map. Various colors and symbols are used in the index. For example, blue color for water bodies, green for lowlands, etc. So not only are the symbols that are represented in a map constitute index, but also the different conventions that are used in a map. A convention is anything that is widely followed and should be known by anybody that is learning that particular field. So when it comes to maps, the conventions are like blue is used for water, green for grasslands or lowlands. Okay, so those are the different index. Now here are pictures for the arrow that is pointing towards the north. And in addition, here we have the index or key. This is also known as the legend of the map. So here we have different lines and what they represent, like we saw in the Karnataka map. Here, the dotted lines, it represent the international boundaries. So this is not corresponding to the map we see above. This is just an example for the index. And down here, we have the next section, that is the uses of maps. So maps, they help us in many ways. They help us locate places like towns, cities, districts, and states and countries and continents. So I would say the most easy to understand use of a map is that it helps us find different places. So this is the reason why we started using maps, because it helps us find directions to any place of our interest. So the other uses include, they show us the physical features such as mountains, plateaus, plains, coastal areas, etc. They also help us know the major routes of transport such as roads and railways. So the Google Maps comes into mind whenever you read about such a use. Whenever you want to know how to get to a particular place, nowadays Google Maps has done an excellent job in mapping even the most remote areas of India. So once you have internet with you, you can use Google Maps to find out routes to different places of your interest. The other way maps help us is to understand the distribution of crops, minerals, and industries. So here they're talking about distribution maps. Maps are very important for military people at the time of war and for security. So, whenever you need a tactical advantage, you need to know about where you are and the surroundings very well. So, maps are very important for military purposes. In addition, maps guide tourists to their destination. This is not limited to tourists. Maps guide anybody that is searching for a destination to the appropriate place. Maps are very good teaching learning aids in the classroom. So, when it comes to developing a sense of direction and position, maps can be very helpful and they're also easy to carry. So, this is about maps. We learned a lot of things when it came to map. First, we learned about the different types of classification of maps based on scale, based on purpose. Alright. Then we learned about the components of a map. We learned also about the uses of the maps. Now, let us move on. Let's move on to understanding about the different geographical symbols. A symbol is a sign that stands for an object. So, a symbol is something that represents something else. The symbols used in a map are the same all over the world. So, this is called as convention. Whenever something is widely followed and it is known all over the world, then using the same thing helps avoid any ambiguity or confusion. So, the geographical symbols give us a lot of information. Here we have the symbols used in topographical maps. We have the different religious places or places of worship over here. We have different symbols for different kinds of vegetation, that is trees, palm, high grass, etc. We have different kinds of roads, wells. We also have some special symbols for heritage places like forts or battlefields. Each symbol has different features to it. For example, colors. The colors assigned to each symbol need to be intuitive. Because we have been representing water blue, it makes sense to use blue color for water bodies. And because plains and lowlands are usually covered by plants and grass, it makes sense to represent them using green color. Okay, so when you look at a physical map, you can see different colors. These colors represent the different physical features. In a physical map, the colors used are as follows: blue color for water bodies like ocean, seas, lakes, rivers; green color for lowlands and plains; yellow for lands that are higher, okay; brown color for hills and lower parts of mountains; dark brown color for high mountains; and white or purple color for snow covered areas. Now let's take a look at this on a map of India. You can see a physical features map of India. So like we learned, the water bodies surrounding India, including the Arabian Sea over here and the Bay of Bengal over here, they are represented using a very light shade of blue. Additionally, we learned that the low grasslands, they are represented using green color. As you can see, the entire of northern plains are represented using light greens. And the yellows you can see over here, they represent higher areas of land. In addition, we also learned that hilly regions are represented using brown As you can see here, throughout the Himalayan ranges, the low-lying hills and mountains are represented in brown, whereas the high mountains that are snow-covered are represented using white. So these are about the different symbols that you can see in physical maps. Besides, different colors are used for political maps to show the different political divisions. Different line symbols with different colors are drawn on a map to show road, railways, airways, etc. Black lines are used for boundaries, red for roads, etc. So they're talking about these different symbols and the colors that have been given to them. Observe that although there is one common convention for widely known or widely used symbols such as boundaries, water areas, etc., you need to follow the legend given in individual maps for the rarely used symbols. Let's next move on to the important part of the lesson, that is map reading. Now, using the information that you have just learned, you need to apply it in a practical basis to actually learn how to read a map. You can do this by taking an atlas and trying to identify all the important features that we have just learnt about. To read and understand a map, you need to know the meaning of the symbols used, just as you need to know the letters of the alphabet to form meaningful words. So here they're giving us an analogy about how you cannot read without knowing the letters of your alphabet. Similarly, you cannot read a map without knowing the symbols, because the symbols are the units of the map. In the same way, you have to know the meaning of colors, lines and symbols which are used in the map to be able to read a map. Down here we have a picture of Karnataka, and over here we have information about how to read a map. Map reading is a skill. We must know the 4 skills of map reading, and we need certain general directions. They are given below. To locate places. So the first thing is to locate places. To locate a place on the map, we have to know the latitude and longitude on which the place is located. For example, taking a look at our map of Karnataka over here, we have, for example, if you go to 16 degrees and then if you go over here to around 75 degrees, then the intersection will give you close to the regions of Belgaum and Bagalkot. Observe that you need to know whether it's 16 degree north or south, and whether it is 76 or 75 degree east or west. In this case, it's 16 degree north and 75 degree east, as you can see over here. That is how you can represent a place and locate one. Now, to find the directions, we learned that we need to know how to find the other directions given north. And to find the distance, the scale given on a map will help us to know the distance between the two places. Okay, students. So using all this information, go slowly one by one and try to learn as much as you can about reading a map. Let's move on to the next section, that is the new terms. So this is just a list of new terms. And down here, you have a list of quite interesting facts. Go through them one by one to know more about them. We will now be starting the question and answers. In the previous video, we have answered up till question 3. Now let's start from question 4. Which are the different types of maps? So the answer to this you need to do based on 2 different ways of classification. The first method of classification is on the basis of scale. There we have 2 large and small and 2 subcategories for each of them. That is the cadastral and topographical for large, and wall and atlas for small scale maps. The next type of classification, do you remember what it was? Yes, it was maps based on purpose. Here we have physical, political and distribution. So this is the different kinds of maps, and that is the answer to question number 4. Up next, you have mention any two uses of maps. This is a fairly easy question because we have an entire list of the uses of maps over here. So you can pick out any two uses that you think is going to be helpful for you to remember and just then answer the question. Next, let's go to question 6. What is an atlas? To answer this, again we need to find the appropriate section of the textbook. So in the beginning, when we talked about different terminologies associated with the map, including cartography, we also talked about the atlas. The collection of various types of maps bound as a book is known as the atlas. The next question is, what is the scale? Now, to answer this, we need to find the definition of a scale, which we have over here. So I'm unable to highlight the section, but you need to answer till over here, that is till the word ground. A scale is a ratio between the distance on the map and the corresponding distance on the ground. The next question, which question number is it? I think it's 7. No, it's 8. What are the geographical symbols? We just learnt about the different geographical symbols. We have the answer over here. A symbol is a sign that stands for an object. The symbols used, again, I'm unable to highlight the exact section, but you need to start from over here, that is a symbol, and you need to answer till over here. The symbols give us a lot of information. So this entire section is the answer for question number 8. Now for 9, what are the major components of a map? Again, let's go back to find the appropriate section. Here we have the 5 major components of the map. That is the title, scale, latitude and longitudes, direction and index or key. So these are the 5 important components of any good map. And you need to answer it for question number 9. Finally, question 10. What color is used to show the water bodies in the map? I don't think you need to search for your textbook to answer this. The answer is the color blue. Blue is used to show the water bodies in the map. Up next, you have different activities. So the first one is an arts and craft activity where you need to make a globe. And the second one is to view different types of maps and find out the differences between the different types of maps. So we learnt about many different kinds of maps. We learnt about large scale, small scale. In large scale, we learnt about cadastral, topographical. In small scale, about the atlas map and wall map. We also learnt about different types of maps based on the purpose, that is political, physical and distribution maps. So try to find one map for all these examples, look into it in detail, and if there is anything you don't understand, try to discuss and search for answers. Next, on an outline map of India, use suitable colors to color and mark the physical features of India and color and mark the oceans and seas surrounding India. So these are the activities that you need to complete. As you already saw in the map of India over here, you can be able to use this as a reference to just go ahead and map the different physical features of the country. Okay, students, we have reached the end of the lesson. I will see you all in the next video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.